Hey, deserving listeners, as a part of my effort to clear the books regarding all the emails that we have acquired over the past year or so, I thought I would quickly answer a bunch of emailed questions. This first email is from annual middle tier patron, anonymous middle tier patron. She says, I enjoyed your episodes where you interviewed the non-offending pedophile. I would like to eventually counsel this population, but I'm not sure how I would get the word out due to stigma. Do you have any suggestions? Well, just chiming in here. Well, if you're looking for referrals, meaning finding venues where people are like, hey, I need a therapist to help with this, meaning that it's other clinicians, that sort of thing, then I would just look in the normal places like Facebook and other kinds of therapist forums online that are in your area, local. Also, you could reach out to other clinicians who do this sort of work because they're usually at capacity and not accepting new clients because these specialists are kind of rare. Also, you could ask your local counseling master's program and ask them who to talk to in the area. When you have a counseling master's program or doctoral program, they're usually kind of connected to a lot of different professionals in the area. But if you're looking for clients directly, like a non-offending pedophile who is looking for a therapist, I guess I would go directly to the non-offending minor attractive persons forums, the NOMAP forums online, and just put your name out there. I'm guessing that they'd appreciate that. Going on with the email. On another note, I was hesitant to listen to your episode on birth order because from what I've read, it sounds like pseudoscience. So just chiming in here, what the anonymous middle tier patron is saying is that, hey, when you published that episode about birth order, I was like, oh no, I don't want to listen to that because there's a lot of pseudoscience around birth order, meaning that there's a lot of claims of personality traits that can be predicted by one's birth order. Going on with the email. And if you're making a point to do an episode on birth order that doesn't include a word like debunking in the title, it sounds like you're going to discuss the merits of the birth order theory. I was afraid my opinion of your academic integrity might go down a notch, but after listening to it in retrospect, I should have known better based on what I already knew about you. Anyways, thanks for what you do. Just chime in here. Yeah, so I guess I should name that episode Debunking Birth Order. But I'm not debunking because I'm just talking about birth order, and I'm also debunking the common notions about birth order. And there is research that supports the common wisdom regarding the birth order personality traits. It's just that there's way more research that demonstrates that there isn't really anything or much that you can say about personality prediction regarding birth order. So, yeah, sorry about that. I don't know. I figure, listen to the episode, see what happens. Going on with the email. Oh, one other thing. I believe the reason that the American Psychiatric Association did away with the diagnosis of sadistic personality disorder, so just chiming in here. Yeah, I talked about how it used to be in the DSM, and at some point they got rid of it, which annoys me because it's an important element of diagnosis and personality assessment, particularly in forensic cases. And also, it is not included in any of, you can have a sadistic person who suffers from sadism, meaning that they actually get pleasure from harming other people. You can have someone who suffers from that personality disorder who is not considered antisocial or a psychopath, meaning that they don't qualify, because a lot of people say, well, if you're sadistic, you must suffer from antisocial personality disorder. No, there is nothing in the criteria for antisocial personality disorder that includes sadism. It's a very different construct. And in research, we understand that they're correlated highly, but they don't always coincide. They're comorbid, but they don't always exist in the same person. So you obviously need this because it's an important element. Plus, without it, a lot of people assume that people who suffer from sadism are antisocial because that's the only label available. It's the closest label available in the DSM. And to be clear, or to draw a fine point on it, you can have someone who actually wakes up in the morning and for various different reasons, they have developed a personality trait in which they enjoy harming others or watching other people get harmed. And yet they have empathy. And that might sound funny, but that is something that we have found. The person might have limited empathy or attenuated empathy, but they actually do care about other people. Similar to minor attracted persons. You can have someone who is minor attracted, who has empathy, and does not want to harm children, even though they have that urge. You can have also the urge of wanting to harm people in general, and yet you have empathy, so you try not to harm other people. And to have a language system and a label that is available to us, not only just for diagnosing sake, but also to raise awareness about it and also for research. It's important. We obviously should understand what is going on with people who suffer from sadism, right? And so it's an important element that needs to be in there. Anyway, so going on with the email here. I believe the reason the APA did away with the diagnosis of sadistic personality disorder was because they were afraid of criminal lawyers who would start using the disorder as a defense in court, even though the DSM clearly states psychiatric diagnoses are not to be used for this purpose. A skillful lawyer, though, could find a way to work around that. End of email. That's interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know that that's what they did, but that makes total sense, and I've seen that before. Like with evolutionary psychology, when I did a lot of reading and research on evolutionary psychology and how it's being used, there are a lot of indications that, like in journals that are oriented towards lawyers, they will have articles about evolutionary psychology, and you're thinking like, what? Why would a lawyer care? And it's because they can use this apparently to get people off. Like one of the defense sort of areas is when you have a mother who kills her newborn, and you have a defense lawyer, and everyone deserves a defense and everyone deserves their day in court. So I'm not saying that that shouldn't happen, but to use these concepts in psychology as a way of saying, look, this person didn't do it because they made a choice. They did it because of a disorder or biology or something. It'd sort of be like if someone has ADHD, and I mean, you wouldn't be in court for this, but if you're at school, for example, and you're distractible, then you should have some accommodations, right? Well, I think that's the argument that a lot of these lawyers will make. And what they were making with evolutionary psychology was that there are evolutionary psychologists who have proposed that it is our nature as humans to kill our own offspring when we have when we have limited resources. And there are examples in the animal kingdom where this will happen. I don't know specifics, but like you'll have a bird or a bear or something that is struggling with food, and they'll just abandon their children and walk away because if they stick around and take care of the children, the newborn children or the young, I don't know what you call it. Do you call cubs? You don't call a baby or young birds children. You know what I'm saying? The offspring. Because if you stick around, you might all die. So you have to abandon in order to live so you can live another day to possibly have other kids. Or you might even eat your young as a way to survive the famine or something. And they were making this case in this journal article that you could use that as a defense for parents who will kill their brand new baby child. And reading that kind of stuff, I'm thinking, oof, okay. I mean, people can evolutionary psychologists can certainly make some hypotheses, but there's no way for us to know if we have that mechanism. That's one. Two, there's no way to know if that's the mechanism that's kicking in. Three, even if that is happening, is that a justification? I mean, we all have an instinct to protect ourselves. Does that give me the right to get a gun and go to my neighbor and shoot them just because they're annoying me or they're encroaching on my land, like they're building a fence that is on my property technically? Do I have the right to get a gun and shoot that person? No, just because a psychologist makes a just so story about our evolution. So I've seen that before, and that's what this, who are you again? Anonymous military patron. You're saying that they wanted to get rid of sadism. But okay, fine. If that's the reason, let's address the problem instead of getting rid of the label. This happens all the time, and it's annoying to me. Like, someone asked me not too long ago about, my professor said that we need to get rid of personality disorders because they're so stigmatizing. And I'm thinking, what? That's like saying, let's get rid of LGBTQ people or the concept of LGBTQ people because it's because people stigmatize them or something. You know what I mean? No, let's not get rid of the thing. Let's get rid of the stigma. Let's not get rid of personality disorders. I mean, we could certainly rework them if you want to, but it's an important concept that's been around for over 100 years and is very useful for not only clinicians, but for clients, for people. And to just discard the whole thing because you have a bunch of people who use the language and the concept to harm people, we shouldn't be living that way. We should be attacking the stigma, not accommodating them. Plus, if we do away with personality disorders, we're just going to have to come up with some other language to describe these people or to guide treatment and research. And guess what? If the stigma remains, they'll just shift to that language. It's like the ever-evolving revolving door of how the labels that we'll use in our society regarding developmentally disabled people. And I just want to say, look, eventually we have to stop changing the language and we have to start attacking the stigma from the ground up, because it doesn't, it's not a win. We're not succeeding on the war if we just change the label. We need to attack why we have an urge to change the label, Anyway, I mean, I'm not saying it was a bad thing to change those labels in the past. I'm just saying sometimes I wonder if it's sort of like the recycling of this in my field, that you have a problem that is very hard to address. And to address it would mean you would have to make a lot of sacrifices and you'd have to really go after it. And you'd have to challenge your own internalized stigma and your own internalized marginalization. And a much easier thing to do is just change the word. And you can walk away saying, we succeeded, when you didn't do anything, meaning that and I'm not saying recycling is bad. I recycle, but it's a well-known thing that, especially in the past, that you would have a huge problem with pollution and with climate change and with, greenhouse gases. And you would have people that would be recycling their aluminum cans and their glass bottles, and they would sleep well at night thinking what a great friend to the environment they are. Meanwhile, they're driving an SUV to work every day, and they're using a lot of air conditioning and heating, and they are voting for politicians that are leaning into coal and fracking, and it's a placater. And I think changing language could be seen in that way, and not all the time, but anyway. I think sadistic personality, but the thing is, I don't really care that it's not in the DSM. It just makes it harder to talk with other clinicians about it just on a certain level. When I think of personality disorders, I don't think the DSM. I think the personality disorder. The DSM just has a particular way of formalizing it, which is great, and it's relevant, and it's not a bad tool. But when I think of a personality disorder, I do not think of the DSM. Passive aggressive is no longer in the DSM. Does that mean it no longer exists? No. Anyway, let's go on to another email. But first, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break, and if I'm going to get to more emails, I gotta go faster. So I'm going to go faster. But first, let's do an OPP. These people became patrons all the way back in 2021 and have stayed patrons ever since. We got all these folks didn't say where they're from. So we got Joel and Tybalt and Nina and Eric and Jane and Joey and Isabel and Layla, I don't know, Lele. Lele. It's probably Lele. Marianne, Kira, Lindsay, David, Joanna, Charlotte, Rachel, Jarko, Mallory, and Felicitas. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and allowing me to butcher your name through thick and thin. All right, let's go into another email. All right, this next email is from good old patron Jocelyn G. She says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. I am in internal family systems therapy, IFS therapy, because I struggle with feelings of loneliness, emptiness, and avoidance behaviors. However, I frequently feel resentful against the IFS model. When I bring my feelings of dependency to therapy, my therapist tells me these parts are desperate to attach to me and that they don't know me yet." All right, just chiming in here. So I think what Jocelyn is talking about is that for some people, when they're using the IFS model, they will see almost everything as being a part of the internal family system. And you can listen to my episodes on internal family system if you want to know more. But essentially, I think what Jocelyn is saying is that her therapist is saying, well, let me back up. So I think what Jocelyn is saying is that Jocelyn is coming to therapy and saying, I feel very lonely, I feel empty, and I avoid things, and I want to have a dependency on somebody that will be a corrective experience for me, someone that will be trustworthy and that will care about me and have unconditional positive regard. And I feel like I need that to help me with my loneliness and my emptiness and my issues. And what the IFS therapist is doing is not addressing that directly, or is addressing it in this particular IFS way. And I don't think all IFS therapists would do this, but what Jocelyn is saying is that the IFS therapist is saying, okay, those feelings, those needs that you have for dependency, for closeness and attachment, that is actually a part of yourself. And what you should be doing to help this problem is to attach to that feeling or attach to that part of you that is having that feeling. So going on to the email. Richard Schwartz, by the way, Richard Schwartz is the individual who developed the theory of IFS. Richard Schwartz once referred to IFS therapy as attachment theory turned inward, and I think this is where it comes from. Is this good for my borderline to work on my inside attachment so I can quell my desperate need for outside attachment? End of email. And Jocelyn always says end of email. I think it's fine. Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess the funniest thing, Jocelyn, is if you put end of email in the middle of an email. Anyway, but for what you're talking about is you're saying, hey, I need help with my borderline and I need help with, and I guess there's various different approaches, but you've heard the approach that I talk about and that Bob talks about. And I'm pretty adamant that therapists at least consider to be somewhere in the ballpark of what Bob and I talk about. And to be clear, we didn't invent it really. I mean, we have our own take on it and our own style with it, but it's not a foreign notion, the kinds of things that I talk about and the kinds of things that Bob talk about. A lot of experts, a lot of people that are in this field have a very similar point of view. Anyway, but what you're saying is that it sounds like your therapist is trying to get you to work on your inside attachment. And I think it's that, what I was saying earlier, of being securely attached from within. And to me, this is where the metaphor breaks down for me. For me, this is where it breaks down for me. That the idea of systems theory is very powerful. And I've talked about it at length before in other episodes, some recent episodes. So I'm not going to go over that again. And I understand using that metaphor. Like in a family, you have the parents and the kids and the cousins and and there's a way that the system operates as a whole, right? And then you can use that metaphor to look at your internal family system. That's why it's called that. And it's a family system that's internal. And you have all these parts of yourself. But that doesn't make any sense. It's just a metaphor. It's not literal, but a lot of people, I think, take it literal, and maybe Richard Schwartz even meant it as literal. And look, IFS is great. It's essentially just another way of looking at schema therapy that I talk about, or schema therapy is another way of looking at IFS, whatever. It's just a way of looking at those parts of you that have been developed in the past that kick in under certain circumstances to protect you or to get your needs met, is probably a better, more broader term. And within schema therapy, I'll talk about how someone might have abandonment schema, in that they have a strong assumption that they will be abandoned and that they're abandonable, and that abandonment is right around the corner, and or they have to make sure they're hypervigilant about clinging, otherwise they'll be abandoned, all those things, right? Whereas in IFS, they would say there's a part of you, like the abandoned little girl inside of you, that will manifest herself to protect you and to cling. And so what you need, it's just that. To me, it can be a very powerful thing. I don't use IFS. It doesn't really move me, but it really helps a lot of people, and I stand by it. I teach it to my students. So it's great. But to take it literally as if you have an internal family system that just doesn't, I mean, there are some parallels when you start stretching the metaphor a little bit, but to be attached, you can't meet your attachment needs by attaching with a schema. Now, if your therapist is saying, look, let's look at that part of you, it's like the therapist might be saying, we need you to attach to that part of you that is desperate for closeness and for lack of abandonment. If that is truly a metaphor, or ultimately a metaphor, or at least it operates in the end like a metaphor, like if I were in this model thinking the way that I think, I would say, hey, let's have you attached to that part of you, and I would go down a road where my goal would be to have you, Jocelyn, understand that part of you that is hypervigilant, that is assuming that other people are going to abandon you, that is very desperate for closeness, that comes from a place that feels that you're pretty bad. But I don't know, as I even think about this, it implies that your desperation for attachment with other people is somehow distorted or something, or misdirected, and really should be directed to the primary you, which is that's counter to all of our science. It doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. If I'm understanding you right, I understand your frustration. It could work, though, is the thing. I don't know what your therapist is doing. I don't even understand if I understand your question. So, but you're asking, is it good for your borderline? I can't tell. All I can tell you is that if you actually have these schemas, then the path is pretty clear. There is an element of self-awareness, and when you have self-awareness, then you can exert control a little bit over your interpretations, over your behavior, or over the hypervigilance, over the assumptions that you're making, the distortions, or at the very least, you can raise the question, maybe I'm distorted in this moment that is shooting me in the foot. That's an important element. Whatever style of therapy can get there, maybe IFS will help you get there. The other element is corrective experience, is behavioral exposure, is secure attachment, earned security. If IFS is going to get you down that road, then great. It can, but I can't tell from your email. All right, this next email is from middle tier patron Gabby from Texas. She says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. I've seen this family on TikTok recently that keeps popping up on my For You page." That's what FIP is, right? FYP, For You page. The family on TikTok that keeps coming up on my FYP consists of a single mom and her 12 children, and her handle is called This Mad Mama. Her content is mostly of her day-to-day life, having 12 biological kids. And from what I've seen, she talks about how she started having children at the age of 14. She even talked about how her oldest was like a mother to her second oldest because of how young she was when she started having children. So just to chiming in here, make sure you're following that there's a woman on TikTok with her 12 kids, and I'm guessing that she includes a lot of video and stories about her children, because that's what she's like, there's a family on TikTok. And so she had a child at 14, and then maybe another child soon after that. And the first kid was like a mother to the second child because she herself was still a child. She could have been 15 or 16 at the time with 2 kids. And so going on. As you can imagine, the family generates a lot of controversy and hate, which I don't subscribe to. I went down a rabbit hole because something rubbed me the wrong way about her. After hearing your deep dive on the Duggars, the idea of children on social media was fresh in my mind. I don't mean any intolerance to this creator, but I was curious on what you thought of situations like this, and why a single mother would continuously have children knowing that her children would have to be parentified to take care of each other. And then she will use her kids to make content so she can pay for their necessities. Do people have kids to fill their attachment needs, or so they can have someone who needs them? I'm not saying that this is what this mother is doing, but it has me wondering about the question in general. Thanks for all you do. You make my drives to work easier. Haha. End of email. Yeah. Well, middle tier patron Gabby, I'm glad you're thinking about this, because it's important, I think, for all of us to think about it, because we're all part of the problem. If we're consuming this content, then we're encouraging it, and we're giving the message to all the other people out there that, hey, this is an option as a career. It's not okay to exploit children in this way. In the same way that if you're working at a factory and it'd be easier to drag your kids to the factory to help you do the work, that's not okay. You're trying to make a living online. Okay, great, but don't drag your kids into it. It's not okay. And I'd rather have children working in factories than I would on these reality TV shows or these family blog things, because the kid that goes to the factory, eventually they get to go home. When you are a part of these families that make their living and make several posts a day, your entire life, everything about you, and sometimes the parents will look for things that are extremely private about the kids because they need content, right? Like about the first menstruation of a child. I'm pretty sure that happened with one of these families that I heard of. I'm sure it's happened many more times, right? And even if the kid is quote unquote consenting, we all understand that the kid doesn't know what they're consenting to. You can't ask a 3-year-old Is it okay if we sign your rights away for the rest of your life and every penny you earn will be given to your parents? And the kid's like, sure, I don't care. They signed the pay. We understand that kids don't have the maturity or experience or wisdom to be able to consent to those kinds of decisions. And arguably making the decision to consent to having your life broadcast to everyone on the planet, it is one of the most severe questions you could ever ask someone. It's a question that carries with it a lot of consequences. And we don't need it. We don't need people on TikTok doing this. We don't need people on YouTube doing this. We don't need people on Instagram. We don't need people on reality TV shows having their children. It's not a need. It's not something that is something that, it's like if we got rid of it, how would we be impacted? Well, entertainment, I think, would be the main thing that would, I guess, suffer, although there's a lot of other things to entertain yourself with. I guess you could argue that for some people, they are helped by watching these families function and learn from their experiences, that kind of thing. And I guess you could also argue that for some families, maybe this family, they wouldn't be able to make a living otherwise, or they make a very good living while being able to be home and having fun. And also, I want to be clear, there's a pretty good chance that a lot of these family bloggers are not harming the kids, and the kids will all grow up and say, not only was it fine, but they actually are really happy that their parents did this kind of content provision. That, I'm sure, will happen and has happened. But how do we know? We don't know. There's no way for us to know. Now, I would settle if we had a law on the books that said, before you are authorized to make this kind of content, a highly trained, government-appointed person who has a lot of power will conduct an ongoing assessment to make sure, and assess things as time goes on, to make sure that the risk of harm to the children is minimized, if not eliminated. As I say that out loud, I can't imagine even that really working, right? Because how would you measure that? How would you know? I mean, there are things you could do, but even that, I imagine, would eliminate a lot of these family blog channels, because that professional in all likelihood would say, well, you can, 9 out of 10 of the things that you want to do, you shouldn't be doing, because that will risk harming the children. There's only one of your ideas or one of the common things that these family bloggers will do on these channels that is, that carries with it a very low risk. Like, you are driving to soccer practice and your kid gets out of the car and you film the kid playing soccer for a little bit. I mean, with that, like, you're filming other kids. It's just like, no, let's just stop it. It just needs to stop. And, it makes sense, right? When you had the internet come about first, you had this period of time where it was completely okay and legal, and also to a large extent culturally sanctioned, and also culturally almost like everyone wanted to do this with revenge porn. That when you had, it's usually women, young women, sometimes teenage women, girls, who had a naked picture of themselves, and they had given it to their boyfriend, or their boyfriend took the picture. And then after breaking up, the boyfriend posted that picture online, and you had a lot of people that were saying, well, you shouldn't have taken that picture. You're a slut. You deserve it. That's what you get. And there was no law in the United States that prevented people from doing that. And what did we do? Well, we changed that, and we changed the law. A lot of people had to be harmed along the way, by the way. And it was going on for years and years, probably since the beginning of the internet. You got 20 years of this happening, at the very least 10, 12, 13 years in earnest. Meanwhile, people are like, hey, we need to change something here. And it's obvious that that's not okay. and then we eventually pass laws. With this, we're in that zone. I hope we're in that zone where we have yet to pass the laws, and those laws will eventually arrive. But how many people have to suffer? And because the thing that got the revenge porn illegalized was because you had this very famous website that was developed and promoted and made successful by this total D-bag who made revenge porn so popular that Congress or legislatures were made aware of it. So, how many people were being harmed under the radar prior to this website in other ways? And you have all these kids. So what major event has to happen? Do we have to have a situation where several kids die? I mean, just think about what's happening with Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt. I mean, how many kids have to suffer before now you could argue the Jodi Hildebrandt, Ruby Franke criminal case it was only sort of tangentially related to their online activity, because you could argue that abuse would have happened even if they weren't family bloggers in the past, Ruby Franke. Anyway, so it just needs to stop. But getting to your question, you're asking, let's see, you say, hey, I'm a little worried about this family, and the email was longer, and they were basically saying that this TikToker actually makes a pretty good living, or enough of a living, and otherwise they would be living in poverty and everyone would be suffering. And well, what we should be saying as a society is, why does that happen at all? Why do you have any family that is faced with homelessness or going without food or having to deal with certain circumstances that are risky? I think that should be the thing we should be attacking. We shouldn't be saying, well, maybe we should fudge on our care for the children because we live in a society that refuses to allocate. We live in the most richest society that has ever lived on this planet. And how do we live with ourselves and sleep at night when there are people going without food and shelter? And it would cost us so little money to give this to people, especially when you compare how much tax dollars we're spending on other shit. So anyway, but going on with getting back to your question, you ask, why would a single mother continuously have kids when they know that they would have to parentify? Most people don't know about parentification. Most people actually will think that their parentified child is actually better than other children because they're more well-behaved, they are mature, they tend not get in trouble because they comply. So the notion of parentification is not only unknown, it's to a large extent considered to be a good thing that happens to children. So there's that. But the question of why a single mother would continuously have children, I don't know. There's a lot of possible reasons for that, and there's nothing inherently wrong with it. A single mother could have a lot of kids, even, well, I think age does play a role, but generally speaking, a quote-unquote single mother could have a lot of kids, and everything could be fine. It's not guaranteed to be a problem. In the same way that you could have the platonic ideal of a family and the white picket fence, and you could have two parents who waited to get married and they waited to have kids. They're 35 now and they have one child, and that child could be suffering in a lot of ways. So this notion that somehow having a lot of kids is guaranteed to cause a problem. Having said that, it raises a lot of risks, and specifically to what's near and dear to me is that it's very hard to attune to 14 children. It's hard enough to attune to one child. If you have 14 children, things are going to get missed. Now, in the olden times, we would have a village that would take care of all these kids, and they could all get their needs met. Grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, neighbors. Now, in our isolated world, I suppose some people might use TikTok in this way. I don't know. So, I don't know. I don't know. Then you ask, do people sometimes have kids to fill their attachment needs? The answer is yeah. In fact, I would hope that they're doing it for that. I would hope that everyone, when they're having kids, are thinking, I have a need to attach to people and to my children. I think what you're really asking, though, is that they're using their children. But again, if it's done in a healthy way, you can absolutely use, quote unquote, use your children for your attachment needs as long as you're attuned to the child. It's not when people have kids, I don't recommend that people have kids 100% selflessly, meaning that I don't recommend that people try to have kids and say like, I'm not going to get anything out of this. Of course, you're going to get a lot out of it, and you should actually want those things. You deserve those things as a parent. But might a parent use their children and not actually attune and need the child to take care of them, need their children to take care of them as a parent? Yeah, that is a problem, and that does happen. And I don't know if it's happening here. I'm not hearing anything along those lines. I mean, who knows? But yeah. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, more emails. All right, back from the break. Let's do another OPP. These people became a patron in 2021 and are still a patron, last I checked. And they are from God knows where. We have Harry, Steph, Y, E, Maya, Jordan, Megan, Veronica, Dr. Kathleen, sounds like an important person, Christine, AJ, Melanie, Rachel, Bryce, Eric, Lana, Melissa, and Anna. Thank you so much for becoming a patron and staying a patron this whole time. All right, this next email is from middle tier patron Joe from Brighton, UK. She says, "Hi, Kirk. After a lifetime of reoccurring obsessions, I have finally found out what it is. It is limerence. Please, would you talk about this or perhaps do a deep dive? It's plagued me my whole life and has caused tremendous pain. It's like an addiction. Much appreciated." Yeah, I plan on doing a deep dive on limerence. I've been asked to do a deep dive on limerence for years and years. To be honest, I'll probably talk about this in the deep dive when and if I do it. I assume I will. That I have been kind of avoiding it because whenever it's not a topic in psychology, at least in my circle. I've never heard anyone in my field, aside from using it just as a general term, certainly not as some sort of diagnosis or psychological phenomenon. And I had to look it up, and it, at least in my perception, it's a pop psychology notion and an online psychology notion, which doesn't mean that it's irrelevant or stupid or something. And as I started to look into how people were using it, I was confused because there were so many other terms in psychology that I would use instead that are more precise and also carry with it a lot of literature and research. So I thought it was one of those words. It's sort of like if no one would do this today, of course, if they knew me for half a second, but if someone asked me, hey, can you talk about what a narcissist is, that kind of thing. And usually when people use that word, a narcissist, I hope that I'm not saying using the term narcissist like a narcissist is bad, but it has become in the past couple of years a bad word to me now because it's used as a bad word. When people, 99.9% of the time when people say he's a narcissist, I either am wondering or I am given a lot of indications that the person actually has no idea what narcissism is or what narcissistic personality is. And then some people will claim, look, I'm just saying a narcissist, meaning that they are narcissistic. I'm not saying they have the personality disorder. In which case I'd say, well, then it's just one of those adjectives that people will use or labels that people will use in life. And I have no idea what it means. It's sort of like the word toxic or something. Okay, fine. But anyway, so when people use the word limerence online, I would always get really confused. Now, I do know that there is a legit area of research, actually, in my field. It was obscure to me, and I have found it. And it does describe and define limerence well, and I want to get into it. But I've always hesitated because if I get into it, I'm worried that everyone that wanted me to talk about it will be disappointed, because I will talk about how here is the definition of my field, and all of the people that have been asking me to talk about it probably are operating from the wrong definition, and here's another word that you can use. And plus, I think part of the attraction of the concept of limerence online is that it feels maybe less pathologizing or something. It's sort of like there's a fair amount of people online that instead of using terms like borderline personality or preoccupied attachment or disorganized attachment, which are clinical terms, well-researched, well-defined, they will use terms like relationship OCD or limerence, actually, or there are other terms as well, or highly sensitive people. They'll use that, something. There's other terms. Empath. I'm an empath. And what I will find out if I'm given the opportunity, or they disclose more information, is that what really they're describing is maybe preoccupied attachment, maybe borderline personality or something. And they either don't know about it, which is fine, or they're trying to avoid the stigma of those labels, which, as I was saying earlier, I'm not a fan of avoiding the labels because assholes are stigmatizing people who are given that label. When I think of people with borderline personality disorder, I don't think of negative things. I think of very positive things, or at least neutral things. So the word borderline is not a bad word. It only is a bad word in some people's minds. And so I think some people would turn to limerence, which I get, but I don't know, you got to wait for the deep dive. I could be completely off. I imagine at least the first chapter of my limerence deep dive will be me exploring how ignorant I was of the term. So it's on the list. And by the way, other things that are on the list, Umberto and I are going to start working on our deep dives for patrons. We polled the patrons and they wanted us to do deep dives on neo-Nazis, which we did in depth. I feel like we just scratched the surface really, but we certainly did a lot of talking there and researching. We also did, people wanted us to do the Casey Anthony, right, and the Jodi Arias. We did those. And then next on the list is Elon Musk and Josh Powell, which I'm looking forward to doing both of those. Those will be pretty interesting to get into. And I also myself have on my short list of deep dives, I want to finish my personality disorders. So antisocial and psychopathy. It's weird. I've never done a deep dive on that before. Also paranoid personality. Is that it? Is that all of them? I feel like that's all of them. Well, I guess I also want to do sadistic personality disorder. Maybe I would do antisocial, psychopathy, and sadistic in the same episode, even though they are distinct from each other. Yeah, limerence is on the list. Maybe limerence is after I finish, or maybe limerence is, I don't know, maybe limerence is next for me. I don't know. I feel like I need to do antisocial and psychopathy. Let's say that. At least for my list now, I'll have, for me, there's the Berto deep dives and there's me deep dives. That antisocial will be next. And I am really curious what I will develop, because when I do these deep dives, I always have a much deeper understanding of these conditions, and I am looking forward to having a stronger sense of the research and my own thoughts on how psychopathy and lack of empathy develops, because there's, of course, a lot of assumptions that it's mainly biological and genetic, and maybe I'll find that to be true, but I suspect it'll be much more complicated than that, and maybe it'll be a lot more developmental and environmental. I don't know. So I need to do that next, and then what I'll do at my short list is number 2 will be limerence, because I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious about what all the hubbub is about. And a lot of people are suffering, and like what you're telling me is that, Joe from Brighton, is that there's a lot of suffering, and I see that online. There are people that seem to think that limerence is like a fun thing or just like a quirk, but I do hear from a lot of people talking about how horrible it is. And so, I think it's important for all of us to understand what's going on. All right, this next email is from anonymous middle tier patron. She says, "Hi, DKH." I see this some DKH. It's Dr. Kirk Honda, right? I see that on YouTube sometimes, DKH. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. Hi, DKH. Thanks so much for responding to my email about criticism trauma. You are definitely on the right path. Well, it's always good to get a follow-up on that. All right, one more email. This email is from middle tier patron Jen from Pennsylvania. She says, "Hello, my question today refers to my inability to deal with the quiet. I am a 33-year-old married mom who is recovering from borderline, and after a diagnosis in 2017, I've made a lot of progress through therapy and reading about my disorder and listening to your episodes about it. And I've arrived at a place where my life is much more quiet and I'm not as affected by the disorder as I used to be." We'll just chime in here. That's great, Jen. Fantastic. Give yourself a pat on the back. There's a lot of work there that I can hear going on with your email. However, something I've noticed is that I cannot handle being alone and quiet anymore. I've always enjoyed getting up early to have alone time and get ready for the day. But these days, I absolutely have to listen to someone talk, like an audiobook or a podcast. Whatever it is, I have to have someone to listen to. This is a constant thing. Even if my kids go out and play for 20 minutes, I will immediately have to have a book or podcast on to listen to. Or else I start feeling that overwhelming sense of boredom creep back in at an alarming rate. Let me read that. Because I hadn't heard what the problem was exactly. So you feel an overwhelming sense of boredom. Why is it so hard for me to say? An overwhelming sense of boredom that will creep back in at an alarming rate. Overwhelming sense of boredom. Boredom. It sounds more like distress of some kind, but anyway. Is this a borderline thing, you say? I see a correlation that as I seem to get better, my need for this becomes more intense. Chiming in, I think meaning that the distress you feel from boredom is more intense. Going on, I've listened to hundreds of audiobooks in this year alone. It's nice because I like reading and listening to stuff, but why can't I value the quiet anymore? Thanks so much for reading. End of email. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm really glad that you are paying attention to yourself and you're listening to your body a lot. That's good. So again, I would explore it with your therapist, but some hypotheses to explore would be that, and this is just off the top of my head, that you're much more in touch with your needs now after recovery. Those needs were there in the past, but you weren't in touch with them. And now that you're in touch with them, you have you notice it, right? In the past, when you were bored, the need was trying to get out, but now you actually notice it when it's coming out. And it might be a need for connection or friends or a relationship or something. I don't know. Another hypothesis to explore is that in the past you were in a constant state of distress and now you're not. But in the past, when you were in a constant state of distress, a break felt good, right? But now it just feels lonely, possibly. I don't know. It doesn't really sound like that, but could be. Another possibility is that you've just changed for some reason. Like it doesn't necessarily have to do with your recovery or borderline or anything. Another hypothesis that I could think of is that you're at the point in your recovery that involves grieving a lot of the pain. You have recovered sufficiently such that you can look back and have enough capacity to feel sorrow about what you went through as a child, as an adult, whatever, and that pain and that grief is like a constant feeling that you're feeling, and when you're distracted, you don't notice that feeling. But when you're not distracted, suddenly all that grief will start to emerge, and you interpret it as boredom. But I don't know. I mean, it is possible to be quote unquote overwhelmed with boredom, but very often, like one of the things that we do in my field is that when a therapist says, "Oh, this one client is so boring," or if a therapist notices that they're bored often with a client, the assumption, and it could be boredom. Sometimes some sessions are just kind of boring. Well, but the assumption is that in all likelihood, it's not actually boredom. It's something else. It is an attempt to avoid by the therapist, or some sort of inducement of the client to make you feel bored, or you're dissociating as a therapist because the countertransference is such that it's touching on something. There's some other reason, and the conscious thought is that it's boredom, but in fact, it has nothing to do with boredom. And when I hear a phrase of overwhelmed with, an overwhelming sense of boredom, I wonder if it actually is something else. And it could be something along these lines that I'm talking about, or 100 other things. But for this last hypothesis, it's like, now that you are over the distress and the pain and the fear, there's a lot of sadness to feel. There's a lot of grief to feel. There's a lot of demoralization. I was just like, golly, I can't believe that I had all those years of pain. I can't believe I went through that as a child. I'm angry about it. I'm sad. It's complicated. It could take a long time. And I'm sad that when I was having issues and being triggered, I might have harmed other people. I don't know, something along those lines. And in the past, you weren't ready to feel those feelings or even really have them. And when you don't have a distraction and you're just sitting there, all of a sudden all these things come in. It would make sense, because if you discovered the diagnosis in 2017 and went through a lot of treatment and it's worked well, it would make sense that you would still have a path along these lines, and it might not be related to borderline specifically, but it's related to post-recovery grief and feelings and anger or whatever, So again, I would explore it with your therapist. All right. Well, that was very satisfying to me. I don't usually get a chance to just do an episode by myself and just kind of answer emails. But that felt good. Tune in next time when I continue doing it, because I only got to, I don't know how many emails, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, it's pretty good, but there's thousands. I mean, okay. What I do is I start with the upper tier, middle tier folks. I'm also trying to prioritize people that are both patrons and YouTube members, because essentially that means that they're middle tier, So if you indicate on the form along those lines, it might mean that your email gets bumped up. I'm not sure. But I start with those, and then when I run out of time and space or effort or energy, because I'm going to try to answer as many emails as I can in a certain amount of episodes, and if I can't get to any more, I'm just going to delete all those past emails, because a lot of them were sent over a year ago, and I figure these people might not even be patrons anymore, or they already had their question answered by another podcast or by their therapist, or maybe I even answered their question by answering another email, because they're related questions. So I guess I'm saying if you want to make the cut, because I mean, really, I don't know what to do because I have to prioritize somehow, and that's, I guess, what I'm doing. Oh, and that doesn't even count the even larger Google Doc of emails from people who aren't patrons or YouTube members. That's where most of the emails come. And that, how big is that doc? I mean, look at that document. Opening it now, Google Drive, DDD. How many pages is this document? It's still loading. It's still counting. I thought, that doesn't look so bad. And okay, it got up to almost 400 pages. 400 pages of emails. So, yeah, I could try to answer as many as I can, but if I answered all of them, I think I'd be dead before I finished. I mean, especially because every day there's more emails that get populated to the thing, So that's what I'm doing, and yeah, it bums me out though. It really does. If I could have a clone, one of the first things that I would task that clone with would be to address every email in some way, either by emailing the person back. I used to be able to do that. Up until even just, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I would I had a system where I would email the person back right away, like that day, or even just that hour, if I could answer it really quickly. Or if it required a longer response, I would say, I'll address this on the podcast at some point. And then I would. So it felt really good to have that completeness. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I have some, obsessive compulsive personality disorder traits, and there's some element of that. So I'm saying all that because it gives me no pleasure to not address all the emails. It really does bum me out. I imagine a lot of people are like, yeah, if you get to it, you get to it. Don't worry about it. So I'm not saying anyone's pressuring me. Yeah, emotionally, it feels like someone walks up to me and says, hey, I have a question, and then I just turn around and walk away. I mean, emotionally, that's what it feels like to me. It really does. And I've been there before. I've emailed podcasters before. I remember years and years ago when podcasts were first coming around, I emailed, what's that one? It's a really popular podcast, or at least it was. Like, is it Stuff You Should Know? Is that what it's called? It's one of those. And there were these two guys, and they just seemed totally down to earth and relatable. And the episodes were really casual, and they gave out their email address, and they were, pretty small-ish back then. I mean, they were one of the bigger podcasts at the time, but I don't think they were huge. This would have been, 2007 or something. And I emailed them and never got an answer back. And of course, I think most people today, including me, would understand that that's likely what would happen. But I remember how it felt. It didn't feel good. I didn't like it. And this podcast has that kind of vibe, right? It's a casual, caring, warm vibe, hopefully, open vibe of a podcast that actually responds to emails online, that kind of thing. I mean, on the air. And so I would imagine that a lot of people email in feeling like I'm going to get to it, or at least I'm going to email the person back. Maybe that's what I'll do. Maybe before I delete them, I'll just, I don't know, that could take years. There's this one YouTube channel called T. Woodford. He repairs guitars, and I love watching his channel. I love guitars, and I do guitar maintenance. I certainly don't fix guitars, but he does, and it also kind of satisfies this I don't know, this kind of like woodworking engineering itch that I have in my life. And so I'll watch him, and he one time talked. He doesn't usually do this, but every once in a while he'll pull the curtain back a little bit and talk about what it's like to be on YouTube. And he gets a lot of emails from people and a lot of requests to fix their guitar because he just seems so good at it, right? And it's just kind of fun to watch a video. It'd be really fun to send in your guitar and have him make a video while he fixes your guitar because you get to see the process. For a lot of people, our guitars are like our children. And, typically you would just send it to a repair shop. They'd repair it and they'd send it back. You wouldn't see what would happen. I guess this would be kind of like having a baby cam or a security camera that you could watch your kids in preschool or something or in daycare. Anyway, not exactly, but what I'm saying. And what he was talking about was because he's such an engineering kind of guy, he broke it all down mathematically and said, okay, I figured out how many emails I get on average per year. And some in the hundreds or thousands or something. And he said, I timed how long on average it takes for me to answer very, very briefly, from the time that it takes me to click on the email and then read the email, even if it's pretty short, the time it takes for me to click on reply and then reply something back and then send and then back to I timed on average, it's 2 minutes. And that sounds like a long time, but when you really look at how long something like that takes, it takes a lot longer because, again, the clicking and the reading and that's on average, right? So he said, if I even attempt to reply to everyone that emails me, it will take me this amount of time per year. And that amount of time amounted to essentially maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks of work, And what he said was, if I chose to do that, then I wouldn't be able to make X amount of videos because I would be just mindlessly, politely replying to every email, even though I don't need to reply to every email. I can't take every gig. And so, I have decided, is what you're saying, that I'm sorry if you don't get a reply from me. It just meant that I'm not interested or I appreciate your kind words or whatever. And when he said that, I was like, oh yeah, that makes so much more sense than the way because I was thinking about it more emotionally. And what he's saying is, look, if you want me to provide content, then I have to think about how I use my time. And if I think about the whole picture here, it means that I think everyone would actually overall want me not to spend the time replying because that will eat into the time making content. Yeah. He wasn't saying that exactly, but that's what I took away from it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll reassure myself with that notion. Anyway. All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Tune in next time when I continue reading emails. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really, really do.